The paper in Alfred Langston's hand was shaking, and it had nothing to do with the wind that tore across the high plains of Colorado in the autumn of 1879. "You are telling me," he said, his voice low and dangerous, the kind of low that made ranch hands step back and horses go still, "that you have a legal document giving you ownership of the Langston Range. Every acre, every water source, every blade of grass my father broke his back to claim." Harlan Doss stood across the land office counter with the composed smile of a man who had already won. He was not a large man, not physically imposing in the way Alfred was, but he had the particular confidence of someone who understood that paperwork could accomplish what no fist ever could. His lawyer, a narrow-shouldered man named Everett Cole, stood slightly behind him, holding a leather satchel as though it contained the crown jewels of the Colorado Territory. "I am not telling you anything, Langston," Doss said pleasantly. "The Territory land record is telling you. Your deed was never properly registered. Your original survey was conducted without a licensed surveyor. The claim your father filed in 1861 has a measurement error of nearly 900 acres, which means the boundary markers you have been using are incorrect. Under the terms of the Homestead Act and the subsequent Colorado territorial statutes, the land you believe you own has lapsed into public domain and has been claimed by my company through proper legal procedure." Alfred stared at him. He had ridden 40 miles through biting wind to reach the land office in Pueblo. He had not slept the night before because one of his breeding mares had foaled early, and he had stayed with her until dawn. His coat was caked with trail dust, his boots were muddy, and his hands, which were large and scarred and had built fence lines and broken horses and carried a dying man out of a burning barn, were trembling. "That land has been in my family for 18 years, he said. "Which is unfortunate," Doss replied, "but not legally relevant." The land office clerk, a thin young man named Pemberton who was clearly terrified of both parties, cleared his throat. "Mr. Langston, the claim was filed by Mr. Doss's company 6 weeks ago. There is a 30-day contest period, but that period has now expired. Unless you can provide a competing survey that demonstrates your original boundaries were correctly established, the transfer stands." Alfred turned and walked out of the land office into the cold Colorado morning, and he stood on the wooden boardwalk with his hat in his hands and the mountains standing huge and indifferent to the north, and he thought about his father, Thomas Langston, who had arrived in this territory with nothing but a mule, a rifle, and a determination that bordered on religious conviction. He thought about the house he had built with his own hands, log by log, room by room. He thought about the cattle, 230 head of good Hereford stock. He thought about the creek that ran cold and clear through the northeast corner of the property, and the meadow where the wildflowers came up thick in May, and the ridge where you could see 3 counties on a clear day. He was going to lose all of it, unless he had heard something 3 weeks ago from a fur trader passing through. A woman had set up a cartography business out of a converted freight wagon in the town of Saguache, about 60 miles to the southwest. Not a woman pretending to do maps while her husband did the real work. An actual cartographer, trained, the fur trader had said, at a school back east, who had been doing survey work for mining operations and railroad prospectors across the territory for 2 years now. Some people laughed. Some people hired her anyway because she was cheaper than the government surveyors and twice as accurate. Alfred Langston was not a man who laughed easily, and he was not a man who dismissed things simply because they were unexpected. He put his hat back on, walked to where his horse was tied at the rail, and swung himself into the saddle. He pointed the horse southwest and started riding. He found her 3 days later, not in Saguache but on the road between Saguache and the San Luis Valley, where her converted freight wagon had a wheel deep in a muddy creek crossing, and she was standing in the water up to her knees, having apparently decided that getting under the wagon to assess the axle situation was more important than keeping her feet dry. Alfred pulled his horse up at the bank and looked at the scene. The wagon was a large one, painted dark green with the words Collins Cartographic Survey painted on the side in careful black letters. 2 mules stood patiently in their traces, untroubled. Tools were organized on exterior hooks with the kind of precision that spoke of someone who genuinely cared about where things were. A surveyor's transit was strapped carefully to the left side. Chains, measuring rods, and a rolled canvas pack he guessed contained field maps were secured on the right. The woman in the creek was perhaps 28. She was tall, with dark hair pinned back practically under a wide-brimmed felt hat that had seen serious use. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows despite the chill, and she had the kind of focused expression on her face that meant she was solving a problem and the universe could wait. "Axle or wheel?" Alfred called. She did not look up immediately. Wheel hub cracked on the left rear. The wheel is still structurally sound, but the hub is going to give if I try to pull forward. I need to relieve the weight before I attempt the crossing. I have rope. I can see that. She looked up then, and he had a moment to register that she had sharp brown eyes and a quality of self-containment that reminded him of the mountains. "If you come in from the upstream side and put your rope on the rear axle, we can use your horse's strength to steady the weight while I lever the wheel clear of the bottom. Can your horse handle stream resistance at a lateral pull?" "He can," Alfred said. "Then yes, I would appreciate the help, though I was managing." "I can see that too," he said, and started moving the horse into the creek. They got the wagon out in about 20 minutes, working together with the efficient communication of 2 people who were both used to physical problem-solving and neither of whom wasted words. He pulled the rope steady, she levered. The wheel came free, and the mules walked forward onto solid ground while Alfred kept the tension on the axle until she signaled him off. She climbed out of the creek, pulled a cloth from her coat pocket, and dried her hands with the brisk thoroughness of someone who found wet hands inconvenient rather than unpleasant. Then she extended one of those hands to him. "Grace Collins," she said, "thank you for the assist." He shook her hand. It was a firm handshake, the kind that meant something. "Alfred Langston, I was looking for you as it happens." She looked at him steadily. "People usually are when they are about to lose something significant. What is it? Mining claim or ranch land?" He blinked. "Ranch land, how did you know? You look like a rancher, not a miner. Your hands say cattle work, not pickaxe work. Your horse is too well cared for to belong to someone who needs my services for recreation, which means the need is urgent. And you have the particular expression of a man who has recently been told something catastrophically unfair by someone with legal backing." She tilted her head. "Am I wrong?" "You are not wrong," Alfred said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You are very perceptive, Miss Collins. I am a cartographer. I read landscapes, human landscapes included." She walked to her wagon and began examining the wheel hub. "Tell me about the claim," he told her. All of it, standing in the thin autumn sun by the side of the road, while she worked on the wheel hub with a small hammer and a punch tool, listening without interrupting. He told her about his father's original claim, filed in 1861. He told her about the survey, conducted by a man named Amos Breckett, who had been something of a surveyor and something of a drunk, as many men on the frontier were both things at once. He told her about the 18 years of improvements, the house and the barn and the fence lines and the breeding program for the Herefords. He told her about Harlan Doss, who had been trying to buy the Langston Range for 4 years because the creek that ran through it was the only reliable water source for 15 miles in any direction, and the man wanted to control water the way other men wanted to control gold. He told her about the land office in Pueblo and Everett Cole's leather satchel and Pemberton's pale, apologetic face. Grace set down her tools, turned to face him, and crossed her arms over her chest. "When was the original survey conducted?" 1863, 2 years after my father filed the claim." "Breckett?" "Yes. I know his work," she said, and something in her voice told him that knowing Breckett's work was not an endorsement. He used a single vernier transit and rarely ran more than 1 check traverse. His measurement errors are characteristically consistent. Southwest corners tend to be the most problematic. Alfred stared at her. How do you know that? Because I have spent the last 2 years correcting his mistakes for other people. She walked to the side of her wagon and unrolled the canvas pack. Inside were maps, dozens of them, organized in tubes and flat sleeves. 3 mining operations in the Southern Territory paid for their claims to be resurveyed after Brackett's original work created boundary conflicts. The error pattern is distinctive. He consistently underestimated the declination correction for this longitude, which means his northwest to southeast survey lines drift about 40 feet per mile. Depending on how many miles your range spans, that drift could account for a significant mismeasurement. Alfred's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. My range runs approximately 9 miles on its longest north-to-south axis. Grace was quiet for a moment, her eyes doing the kind of rapid calculation that people usually needed pencil and paper for. 360 feet of accumulated error on that line alone. Combine that with the lateral drift on the east-west measurements, and yes, 900 acres is consistent with what Brackett would have gotten wrong. She looked up at him. The interesting question is not whether the error exists. It does. The question is whether the error works in your favor or against you. Meaning the actual land your father settled and improved may be correctly yours under the law, but Brackett's survey placed the boundary markers in the wrong positions. If the error pushed your markers inward, then you are actually using land you own and your actual boundaries extend farther than the markers show. If the error pushed the markers outward, you have been using land adjacent to your claim. I need to know which way the error ran. Can you determine that? Yes, she said simply. But it requires a field survey of the entire range, using a double vernier transit with full check traverses at every station, taking magnetic declination readings at multiple points to correct for local variation, and conducting the computation in full. It will take approximately 2 weeks. I will pay you whatever you ask. She looked at him for a moment. Not the way women sometimes looked at him, with the particular appraisal that came from his being a rancher who owned land and was considered a reasonable prospect by mothers throughout 3 counties. She looked at him the way she had looked at the wheel hub, with a professional assessment of whether the situation was worth her time and expertise. My fee for a full boundary survey of this size is $120, payable half before and half upon completion of the final certified map. If the survey is not able to establish your claim, I will refund the initial payment. She held out her hand again. Those are my terms. He shook it. When can you start? As soon as this wheel hub is secured, she said, and turned back to her tools. They made camp that night at the edge of a pine grove where the road bent north, because Grace had assessed the wheel repair and decided that while functional, it needed to set overnight before she trusted it to loaded travel. Alfred had supplies enough for the road, and he shared what he had without making a ceremony of it, which she appreciated. She built her own fire with the practiced economy of someone who had spent 2 years living out of a wagon, and she cooked her own food, and she sat across from him in the firelight with a field journal in her lap, making notes in a handwriting that was small and precise and slanted slightly to the left. She was not what he had expected. He was not certain what he had expected. Something rougher, perhaps, or something trying harder to prove itself. Women who did unconventional things in 1879 often had a defensive quality about them, a readiness for the argument that would inevitably come, that made them seem slightly brittle. Grace Collins had none of that. She had the particular ease of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that she was going to do what she was trained to do regardless of anyone else's opinion on the matter, and who found the opinions themselves simply uninteresting. "Where did you train?" he asked, not intrusively, just making the conversation that people make across a campfire. "At the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York," she said, still writing. "Class of 1873. I was the only woman in the engineering program. There were 16 men. Most of them were fine about it after the first month. 2 of them never were. She paused, looked up. My father was a surveyor. He taught me to read instruments before I could read books. By the time I was 12, I could run a chain traverse without assistance. College gave me the theoretical foundation to understand why the practical methods worked. Why the West? Alfred asked. She set her pen down and looked at the fire for a moment. Because the East is mapped. Every county, every township, every lot line. There is nothing left to discover in the East, nothing left to define. Out here, the land is still becoming itself. The maps are still being made. She looked up at the sky, which was extravagant with stars at this altitude, the kind of sky that made eastern cities seem like a failure of imagination. The work matters out here. When I draw a boundary line, it is not an abstraction. It determines who eats and who does not, whose children inherit what. That feels significant. He looked at her across the fire. She was in profile to him now, looking at the stars, and there was something in her face that was very peaceful and very serious at the same time. He had met a lot of people in his 32 years on the frontier, and he had a general sense that he could read most of them in the first hour of acquaintance. Grace Collins was doing something to that sense. He kept thinking he understood her, and then she would say something or do something that opened another room he had not known was there. Your father, he said, is he still surveying? He died in 1875, she said, without particular drama. Heart. He was not yet 50. A pause. He was the one who told me to come west, before he died. He said the best cartographers follow the unmapped edge, and the unmapped edge was here. Good advice, Alfred said. Yes. She picked up her pen again. He was a very good man. They were quiet after that, in the companionable way of people who are comfortable with silence, and the fire burned down and the coyotes called to each other across the dark valley, and Alfred Langston, who had not slept properly in 4 days, fell asleep in his blanket roll with his boots on and did not wake until dawn. When he woke, Grace was already up, had already made coffee, and was standing at the back of her wagon organizing her instruments with a focused attention that was almost meditative. He watched her for a moment before she knew he was awake, this woman who was perhaps his only hope of saving 18 years of his family's life work, and he felt something shift in him that he was not ready to name yet. He sat up, reached for the coffee, and said, "What do you need to know about the property before we get there?" She handed him a notebook. It had a list already written in it, dated that morning, in her small, precise hand. He read it. It was comprehensive. It included questions about the natural landmarks, the creek course, the locations of the original boundary markers, the legal description from the original filing, the date of each improvement made to the land, and a note that said, "Obtain original survey notes from Beckett if possible." Where would those be stored? I do not know where Beckett's notes are, Alfred said. The man died in 1871. Did he have a family? A son, Cornelius Beckett, lives in Cannon City, I believe. We will send a telegraph from Saguache, Grace said, and ask Cornelius Beckett to look for his father's survey notes. If those notes survive, they may contain the raw measurements before Beckett applied his corrections. Those raw numbers are what I need. They will tell me exactly how he made his errors. Alfred looked at her over the rim of the coffee cup. The morning light was in her hair where it was coming loose from the pins, and she looked entirely alive and entirely purposeful, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was remarkable. "You have thought about this more thoroughly in 1 night than I have in 3 weeks, he said. She took the notebook back. I do not waste time thinking about whether something is possible. I think about how it will be done. She paused, then added with the smallest ghost of a smile, "Also, your problem is an interesting one. I have been solving Beckett problems for 2 years. This will be the largest one. I find it engaging." They reached Saguache the next afternoon, sent the telegraph to Cornelius Beckett in Cannon City, resupplied Grace's wagon with food and lamp oil and extra chain, and set out the following morning for the Langston Range, which lay 2 days' ride to the northeast, in the high grass country below the wet mountains. Alfred's ranch was exactly what it sounded like a man had built by hand over 18 years. The house was substantial, 2 stories of chinked log with a covered porch along the south face, 4 rooms downstairs and 2 up, a stone fireplace that drew cleanly glass windows which had cost a significant amount in 1872. The barn was better than most barns in 3 counties, with proper ventilation and stalls that were sized for working animals rather than built by someone who had never thought about the animal's comfort. There was a bunkhouse where 3 ranch hands lived, men named Rays, Odell, and a young man everyone called Dutch. Grace drove her wagon into the yard and climbed down and stood looking at the whole of it, the house and barn and the fence lines running away into the distance and the cattle visible on the south pasture and the mountains lifting behind all of it in the clear, cool air. "Your father built this," she said. "It was not a question." "We built it together," Alfred said. "He started it. I finished the 2nd story after he passed." "When did he pass?" 1874. He looked at the house. "1 year after I got back from driving cattle up from Texas. He made it long enough to see me come home, and then he seemed to decide his work was done." Grace turned to look at him. There was something in her expression that was more personal than professional, a recognition of something shared. 63, she asked. It took him a moment. "Yes, 63 was when he filed the claim. And your mother never came west. She stayed in Ohio with her people. She and my father were not a good match. He loved open country and she loved walls." He said it without bitterness. It was simply the truth of his history. "It was just the 2 of us out here after I was 14. Grace nodded slowly, then turned back to the wagon. "I will set up my equipment in the morning and begin at the northwest corner. That is where Brackett's drift would have started and where the largest accumulated error should be visible. I will need you or one of your men to carry the rear rod for the traverse." "I will do it myself," Alfred said. She looked at him with something that might have been appreciation. "Good. It goes faster when the person carrying the rod understands why the precise placement matters." "I have run chain before," he said. "Even better." She stayed in the converted wagon, which she had fitted out with a narrow sleeping platform, a fold-down work desk, and a small wood stove that kept it surprisingly warm at night. Alfred offered the guest room, and she declined with the same easy certainty with which she made all her decisions, not rudely, but with the simplicity of someone who knew what they needed and did not require managing. They started the next morning at first light, Alfred carrying the rear rod while Grace set up her transit on its tripod in the tall grass of the northwest corner of the property. The original boundary marker, a post of weathered cedar set into a cairn of stones, was right where Alfred had been told all his life it stood. Grace leveled her instrument, took her first backsight, and began. He had carried chain and rod before, helping his father with minor boundary work, but he had never watched anyone work a transit with the focus and exactitude Grace brought to it. She would set her instrument, level it with the tiny spirit bubble until she was satisfied, take the reading, call it to him, and he would record it, and then she would pace the distance to the next station, verifying with the chain, and begin again. She talked through what she was seeing in a low, continuous commentary that was partly for his benefit and partly for herself. "Southwest corner marker is here," she said 3 hours into the first day's work, standing at the stone cairn in the lower corner of the property. "Now this is interesting." She looked through the transit, adjusting the vernier scale with a touch that was both practiced and careful. "The bearing from the northwest corner to this point is south 12 degrees 43 minutes east. If Brackett's original survey reads what I expect it to read, he would have recorded south 12 degrees 6 minutes east. That is a difference of 37 arc minutes." Alfred, who had been carrying the rod and recording numbers all morning and was not entirely warm, looked at her. "Is that significant?" "It is exactly the signature declination error I have seen in his other work in this part of the territory. 30 to 40 arc minutes of uncorrected magnetic declination." "Yes." She straightened from the instrument. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her eyes were bright with the specific light of someone who is confirming a theory. "It is very significant. It means the boundary line from your northwest to your southwest corner is running approximately 40 feet per mile east of where it should be. Over the length of this boundary, that means your western fence line is set inside your actual western boundary." Alfred processed this. "So my actual western boundary is further west than my fence. By approximately 230 feet, yes. The land you have been legally claiming through adverse possession and improvement extends further west than Harlan Doss's filing accounts for, which means his survey of your supposed lapsed claim was based on Brackett's original error, and the land he filed on is not, in fact, identical to the land you have been using." She paused, folding her notepad. "This is going to be a more complete victory than I initially believed possible." He stared at her. "What does that mean, more complete?" "It means I think when I have run the full traverse and completed the computation, we will find that not only are your original boundaries defensible, but Doss filed his competing claim on a set of coordinates that do not correspond to the land you actually settled and improved. He was relying on Brackett's incorrect survey without verifying it. His entire claim may be predicated on a phantom boundary." She looked at him steadily. "If that is the case, the land office will not only have to reject his claim but may have to review whether he filed fraudulently, since the survey he submitted in support of his claim contains errors that a competent review would have caught." Alfred Langston was not a man who showed a great deal on his face as a general rule. People who knew him described him as steady, contained, reliable in the way that certain mountains are reliable. But he stood in the tall autumn grass of his father's land in the morning cold, and he felt his jaw go slightly loose. And for a moment, he was not 32 years old and competent and self-sufficient. He was just a man who had been terrified for 3 weeks and had just been told he might be all right. "Miss Collins," he said, and his voice was not quite level. "Alfred," she said, with a gentleness she had not previously used toward him, "I said I think. I need to run the full traverse. 4 more days at minimum, but what I am seeing is consistent with everything I hoped to find when you described the situation." She paused. "This is what I do." He nodded. He put his hat back on, which he had taken off for no reason he could consciously name. "Right," he said. "Let's keep going." They kept going. 4 more days, which stretched to 6 because one day a storm came in off the mountains with the kind of decisive ferocity the high country could produce in October, driving horizontal snow that made instrument work impossible. And Grace used that day at the wagon's fold-down desk, doing computation on the measurements already collected, filling pages with figures in her precise small hand, occasionally saying things to herself under her breath that were either mathematical assessments or mild profanity. Alfred was not always certain which. He brought her meals during the storm day, which she accepted with a distracted gratitude that told him she was deep inside the problem, and the food was an interruption her body needed but her mind had not planned for. The second time he knocked on the wagon's rear door, she opened it and stood with a pencil behind her ear and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and ink on the side of her left hand, and she looked at the plate of food and then at him and said, "Come in." "It is too cold to stand in the doorway." He came in. The wagon's interior was organized with extraordinary efficiency, the sleeping platform folded against the wall. The work desk was covered with maps, some drawn in the elegant hand he had come to recognize as hers, some older documents with the faded ink of other hands, some that appeared to be official territory maps. The wood stove was going steadily. It was remarkably warm. "These are the computation sheets," she said, pointing to the papers closest to the lamp. "These are my field notes. These are the Brackett comparisons I have been building since I started working on his surveys in '77. She moved a stack of papers so he had room to set the plate down. "And this," she said, unrolling a half-finished map on the desk beside the computation sheets, "is your ranch." He looked at it. It was drawn on heavy cream-colored paper, in the fine lines of a well-made instrument, with measurements noted in her precise hand at each course. The boundary lines were solid. The fence lines were noted in dotted marks. The creek ran through the northeast corner in a careful curve. The house and barn were represented by small, precise rectangles. The meadow with the wildflowers, which he had mentioned to her on the second day when they were surveying near it, was labeled in her hand. Spring Meadow noted. He was staring at it. He could feel something in his chest that was not quite grief but was related to it, the feeling of seeing something you love represented with complete accuracy by someone else, the shock of being understood. "You put the meadow in," he said. She looked at the map. "It is a significant landmark. It will be a reference point in the certified boundary description." He knew that was the professional answer. He also noticed she did not remove the label Spring Meadow, noted when she easily could have made it less personal. "Grace," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, though she had been using his for days. She looked up. "Thank you for doing this work properly." She held his gaze for a moment. "Everything worth doing is worth doing correctly," she said. It was not a platitude when she said it. It was a statement of values. "I am aware of that," he said. "I just was not certain anyone else was." Something shifted between them in that warm, paper-smelling, lamplit space. Not dramatically, not with any particular announcement. But the quality of the air changed slightly, the way air changes before weather, and they both felt it, and neither of them moved to address it directly, which is often how the most significant things begin. The storm cleared by the next morning. Grace was up before it finished clearing, at the wagon's desk in the gray pre-dawn light with the lamp burning and her pencil moving, finishing the computation she had been building through the previous day. When Alfred came out of the house at first light, she was already standing at the wagon's back door with a mug of coffee and an expression of quiet triumph. "Sit down," she said, gesturing at the split-log bench beside the barn. He sat. She stood before him with the coffee mug in one hand and a folded paper in the other, and she was very still the way she got very still when she was about to say something important. "The full computation is complete," she said. "All 6 days of field measurements, corrected for magnetic declination at 3 observation points, checked against a full closed traverse with a closure error of less than 1 foot over the entire perimeter. Your original claim, as filed by your father in 1861, and improved upon continuously since that date, encompasses 4,183 acres. He looked at her. He had always believed he owned approximately 3,200 acres. "The Beckett survey underestimated your claim by approximately 980 acres, she continued. "The error ran consistently inward, placing all 4 of your boundary markers inside your actual claimed land. You have never been using land outside your legitimate boundaries. In fact, Harlan Doss's competing claim was filed on a set of coordinates derived from Beckett's incorrect measurements, meaning he filed for land that the corrected survey shows to be fully within your legitimate holding. His entire claim is predicated on a phantom boundary that never corresponded to reality." Alfred was very still. A crow was calling somewhere above the barn. The mountains were white with the overnight snow and brilliant in the early light. "He has no claim," Alfred said slowly. "He has a claim to land that does not correspond to land you have been using or improving," Grace said carefully. "He filed a legal document. It will have to be contested. But the certified survey I will provide gives you not only the defensive argument that your original claim was properly established, it gives you the affirmative argument that Doss filed a fraudulent competing claim based on a survey he knew or should have known was defective." She unfolded the paper and handed it to him. "This is a preliminary summary of my findings. The certified map will be completed in 3 more days." That map, signed and stamped, is a legal document that supersedes Beckett's original survey for the purposes of territorial land law. He took the paper. He looked at it for a long moment, reading the precise technical language of her findings, and then he looked up at her. "How did you know," he said slowly, "that the error ran inward? When you first heard the case on the road, you said the interesting question was which direction the error ran. You seemed to believe even then that it might run in my favor." She sat down on the other end of the bench, holding her coffee with both hands. "Because Doss's case depended on the error running inward. If the error had run outward, you would have been using more land than you claimed, and the territory would have had cause to contest your boundaries regardless of any competing claim. Doss is a clever man. He would not have filed a competing claim unless he had done enough research to believe the error ran the way he needed it to run. What he did not consider is that by using Brackett's survey as the foundation for his own competing claim, he anchored his position to the same defective measurements. When the correct measurements are applied, his claim does not survive." Alfred stared at her. He trapped himself. "He trapped himself with the same document he thought would trap you," she confirmed. "It is a satisfying geometry, the ghost of a smile again." He laughed. He had not laughed in a long time, a real laugh, and it surprised them both. It startled the crow out of the barn eave, which made Grace look up, and then she was smiling too, and the morning was very bright around them. "Come inside," he said. "I will make breakfast. You have earned it." She stood, considering this. "I thought you could not cook." "Dutch cooked," he agreed. "I said I would make breakfast. Those are not the same thing." She looked amused. "Clarify." "I can cook eggs and fry bacon. I can make biscuits if given adequate warning. I can boil coffee without destroying it." He was already moving toward the house. "What I cannot do is the elaborate affairs Dutch produces, which involve things he will not explain." "Eggs and bacon is sufficient," Grace said, following him. "Eggs and bacon is excellent." He cooked breakfast, and she sat at the kitchen table with her field journal and made notes, and Rays and Odell and Dutch came in from the bunkhouse at their usual time, and found a woman at the kitchen table and a rancher at the stove, and had the collective wisdom not to remark on either. Dutch quietly made the coffee so it would be done correctly, which Alfred accepted with the dignity of a man who knows his limitations. Rays, who had been with Alfred for 6 years and was 41 and not given to excessive speech, looked at the map Grace had set on the corner of the table while she worked, then looked at Alfred, then at Grace. "This is the survey?" he asked. "Preliminary," Grace said, not looking up. "The certified version will be complete in 3 days. You can show this to the land office." "I can show the certified version to the land office, yes." Rays nodded with the slowness of a man absorbing significant information. He looked at Alfred. "Good," he said simply, which from Rays was roughly equivalent to a speech of thanksgiving. Grace completed the certified map on the afternoon of the 3rd day after the storm. She worked at the wagon's desk with her ruling pen and ink, drawing the final map on a double-weight linen paper that was the standard for legal cartographic documents in the territory. She was meticulous. The lines were clean and exact. The bearings and distances at each course were noted in figures that were both legible and unarguable. The natural landmarks were shown. The improvements, the house, barn, bunkhouse, fence lines, creek crossings were all recorded. She wrote the survey certificate in its proper form, stating her credentials, her instruments, the method of survey, the date of completion, and her professional attestation that the measurements were accurate. She signed it, dated it, and pressed her surveyor's stamp to it. Then she called Alfred to the wagon. He stood at the rear door, and she spread the map on the fold-down desk and stood back, and he looked at it. It was his father's land. It was his land. It was 4,183 acres of the high grass country at the foot of the wet mountains, and every inch of it was drawn by this woman's hand, with the kind of precise authority that no court in the territory could reasonably dispute. The boundary lines were not where Amos Brackett had drunkenly estimated them to be in 1863. They were where the instruments said they were, where the careful mathematics said they were, where they actually were. Alfred Langston looked at that map for a long time. Then he looked at Grace Collins. She was watching him with an expression that was professional in its composure but warm underneath, the way the sun is always there even on a cloudy day. "This is my land," he said. "This is your land," she confirmed. He said nothing for a moment, and then he said, My father would have been very glad to see this. She was quiet with that for a respectful moment. Then professionally, I will prepare the filing documents as well. The land office in Pueblo will need the certified map, a written summary of my survey findings and methodology, and a formal challenge to the Doss competing claim citing the defective survey evidence. I would recommend engaging a lawyer for the formal challenge, but the cartographic evidence is unambiguous. Any competent judge or land commissioner will have no difficulty reading this map. Do you know a lawyer? He asked. I know a woman attorney in Denver, she said, and the smallest smile. Yes, a woman. She is better than most of the men, and she knows land law thoroughly. Her name is Margaret Fitch. He looked at her. You know a great many remarkable people, Miss Collins. Grace, she said, which was the correction she had not made when he first started calling her Miss Collins formally. She made it now quietly, and something in it was different from the easy first-name use of the working days, something that acknowledged the shift. Grace, he said. They left for Pueblo 4 days later. Alfred rode his horse and Grace drove her wagon, and they took the long road through the mountains where the aspens had gone gold and the air smelled of pine and cold water. They rode mostly in comfortable proximity rather than side-by-side conversation. But in the evenings at camp, the conversation came naturally and went long into the night, fueled by the particular intimacy of people who have worked hard together toward a shared purpose and found they like what they have discovered about each other. She told him about her years at Rensselaer, the battles she had fought simply to be allowed to use the equipment and attend the lectures. The professor who had told her women had insufficient spatial reasoning for cartography, and whom she had then outscored on every examination for 2 years. She told him about her first Western job, with a mining operation in Nevada, whose foreman had refused to speak directly to her for the first 2 weeks, addressing all questions through her mule as if the animal were her representative. She told him about the moment she had realized the West was where she belonged, standing on a ridge in the San Juan Mountains in the summer of 1877, with her transit and the whole of an unmapped valley below her, and feeling something that she could only describe as arriving. He told her about the cattle drives, the years when the Langston ranch's only income had come from what he could produce and drive to market, and the margins were so thin that a bad season could end everything. He told her about the winter of 1872 when a blizzard had killed 40 head, and he and his father had worked for 3 days in the snow trying to save what they could, and how his father had said afterward, sitting by the fire with his hands wrapped around a cup, that the land was never sorry for what it took and you could not afford to be sorry either. You just had to start again. He told her about the night the breeding mare foaled early and he had stayed with her, and how he had been riding to Pueblo on no sleep when the deed situation exploded, and how the exhaustion had made the land office scene feel like something happening to another person. Were you frightened? She asked. They were by the fire on the second night out of the ranch, and the question was asked without condescension, with genuine curiosity. Yes, he said, which was not the answer most men gave when asked if they were frightened, but he had the sense that lying to this woman would be both futile and disrespectful. Of losing the land, she asked. Of failing him, Alfred said. My father. Of having the thing he built with his life taken because I was not clever enough to stop it. Grace was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled between them. You were clever enough to find me, she said eventually. He looked at her across the fire. In the firelight her face was clear and serious, and she meant it straightforwardly, as a statement of fact, not as flattery. She was telling him that he had made the right decision, that coming to find her had been the correct, intelligent response to an impossible situation, and she was acknowledging it with the directness that was entirely characteristic of her. You did the work, he said. We both did the work, she corrected. You carried the rod for 6 days in October cold without complaint and recorded the measurements correctly every time and asked good questions when you did not understand something. That is not nothing. He smiled at that. It was a real smile, the kind that used his eyes. She saw it, and something in her own expression softened in a way she probably did not entirely intend. In Pueblo, they went to the land office, and the scene was considerably different from Alfred's previous visit. Grace Collins walked in carrying her transit case as a general carries a battle standard, wearing her professional coat and hat, and the expression of a woman who has done her calculations and knows the outcome. She set the certified map on the land office counter and stood back while Pemberton unrolled it, and the expression on Pemberton's face went from cautious professionalism to open admiration in about 30 seconds. "This is a full-closed traverse survey," Pemberton said, looking up. "Yes," Grace said, "corrected for magnetic declination. At 3 observation points, yes. The closure error is documented in the certificate." Pemberton looked at the closure error, which was 0.7 of a foot over the full perimeter. He looked at it for a moment too long, and Grace, who had worked with land office clerks across the territory for 2 years, recognized the expression of a man who has never in his professional life seen a survey this tight. "The Beckett survey error is documented in Section 3 of the certification," she said, pointing him to it without condescension. "The systematic declination error in Beckett's work creates the apparent boundary discrepancy on which Mr. Doss's competing claim is based. As the certified measurements demonstrate, the corrected boundaries encompass all land that has been continuously settled and improved by the Langston family since 1861. Pemberton read Section 3. Then he read it again. "Miss Collins," he said, "when you say Doss's claim is predicated on the defective Beckett measurements, I mean that the coordinates he filed correspond to no land that Langston has failed to continuously improve and occupy. The competing claim exists on paper. It does not correspond to reality as measured by correct instruments." She paused. "I am prepared to appear before a commissioner or judge to explain the cartographic evidence if required." Pemberton set the map down carefully and looked at Alfred. "Mr. Langston," he said, "I think you should come back in 2 days. I need to speak with the commissioner." Harlan Doss appeared on the second day, which Alfred had expected. He arrived at the land office with Everett Cole and the leather satchel, and the composed confidence of a man who had not yet been informed that the foundations of his position had been removed. He looked at Alfred across the counter, and then he looked at Grace, and something shifted behind his eyes. "Miss Collins," he said, not pleasantly, "I have heard you do survey work." "Mr. Doss," she replied with perfect equanimity, "I have completed a full boundary survey of the Langston Range. The certified map is before the commissioner. I am sure it is very competent work," he said, and the word "very" did things with its tone. "However, I would point out that a competing survey conducted on behalf of a single party does not supersede. The survey is not conducted on behalf of a party," Grace said, with the calm of someone who has had this conversation in various forms many times. "It is conducted according to established cartographic and geodetic methods, and the results are what the instruments and mathematics produce. I do not manufacture findings that favor my clients. I report what the measurements show. The measurements show that Mr. Langston's original claim is correctly established, and that your competing claim is based on defective coordinates." She looked at him steadily. "You are welcome to hire a surveyor to contest my findings. They will reach the same conclusions if they are competent." Doss looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Alfred. Whatever he saw in Alfred's face, which was calm and contained and not remotely apologetic, did not give him what he was looking for. "We will speak to the commissioner," he said to Cole. "I expect you will," Grace said. The commissioner met with both parties the following morning. His name was William Stanhope, and he was 62 years old and had been dealing with boundary disputes in the Colorado Territory for 15 years, and he had the expression of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by very little. He surprised himself that morning. He looked at Grace's map for 40 minutes, asking her technical questions that she answered precisely and completely, referring to her computation sheets and field notes. He looked at the Beckett survey that Doss's case was built upon. He looked at Grace's documentation of the Beckett systematic error, including the comparison cases from the 3 Nevada mining surveys. He looked at Doss's competing claim filing. "Mr. Cole," he said finally, "the coordinates in Mr. Doss's competing claim correspond to which surveying document?" Cole cleared his throat. "The original Beckett survey of the Langston boundaries. The original Beckett survey, which Miss Collins has demonstrated, contains a systematic declination error of approximately 37 arc-minutes that causes an accumulated measurement error of 980 acres over the full perimeter. The accuracy of that characterization is supported by 6 days of field measurements, 3 declination observation checks, a closed traverse with a 0.7 of a foot closure error, and documentation of the identical Beckett error pattern in 3 separate previous surveys," Grace said quietly, from the chair in which she sat with her hands folded on top of her documentation. The commissioner looked at her. Then he looked at Doss. "Mr. Doss, the Land Office accepted your competing claim filing without conducting an independent survey review. That was an error on our part, for which I will note my own office is partially responsible. However, Miss Collins's certified survey supersedes the Beckett document, which has the same legal standing as the unverified original claim filing. The certified survey establishes Mr. Langston's boundaries as measured and documented. Your competing claim, as filed, corresponds to a set of coordinates that the certified survey demonstrates fall within Mr. Langston's established claim." He closed the folder in front of him. "The competing claim is denied. Mr. Langston's title stands as certified by Collins' cartographic survey." He looked at Doss with the particular gravity of a man who has one more thing to say. "Furthermore, I am referring the matter of the basis for your competing claim filing to the Territorial Attorney's Office for review. Filing a claim based on a known defective survey document when the correct measurements would have revealed no viable competing claim is a matter that may have legal implications beyond the scope of this office." Doss was very still. Cole had gone the color of old paper. Everett Cole, who had spent his professional life in the company of men like Harlan Doss, and who had long ago made his peace with certain moral compromises, looked in that moment like a man who was reassessing some of those compromises. "I see," Doss said. "I expect you do," Commissioner Stanhope said, and gathered his papers. Outside the land office in the cold, bright Pueblo afternoon, Alfred Langston stopped on the boardwalk and stood for a moment with his hand on the post and his hat pushed back and the whole of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains visible to the southwest, pink and enormous in the distance. "It is done," Grace said, standing beside him. "It is done," he agreed. She was watching him with the steady attention she gave to things that interested her, which included him, he knew, in a way that had grown beyond professional over the days on the range and the evenings by the fire. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I have a mineral survey inquiry in the San Juans to attend to," she said. "A silver operation out of Lake City wants their claim boundaries verified before they invest in processing equipment. I should leave in the next day or 2. He turned to look at her. "I would like to pay you the second half of the fee," he said. "I expected you would," she said. "That is generally how payment works." "And," he said, and then he stopped, which was not a thing he often did. He was not a man who stopped in the middle of sentences. He restarted. "I would like to ask you to come back to the ranch." She was quiet. "Not for professional reasons," he said. The mountain wind moved between them and a wagon rattled past in the street, and somewhere down the block someone was hammering something with steady industry. Grace Collins looked at Alfred Langston with those sharp brown eyes and seemed to be doing the kind of calculation she did when she was solving a problem that mattered. "You are asking me to return," she said. "I am asking you to return," he confirmed. "After the San Juan survey." "After the San Juan survey. Whenever, if you would be willing." He met her gaze directly, which she respected. She had always respected that about him. I am not asking you to give up your work. I have seen what your work means to you, and I would not ask that any more than I would ask the mountains to stop being mountains. I am asking if the ranch might be somewhere you would come back to." She was quiet for a long enough moment that he thought the answer might be no, and was already preparing himself for that with the same discipline he applied to bad seasons and hard winters. "The San Juan survey will take 3 weeks," she said finally. 3 weeks is not very long," he said. "No," she agreed. "It is not." She looked at him with something that was neither professional nor guarded, something open and warm and deliberate. "I will return in 3 weeks." "Then I will be there," he said. She was there in 3 weeks and 2 days, which was close enough. She drove her dark green wagon into the yard of the Langston ranch on a clear November morning, with the first real cold of winter in the air. And Alfred came out of the barn, where he had been doing nothing in particular for the last 40 minutes except not watching for the wagon. And Dutch came out of the bunkhouse for genuine reasons. And Reyes, who was mending fence near the yard, looked up with the contained satisfaction of a man whose assessments have proven correct. She climbed down from the wagon and he met her in the yard, and they stood 3 feet apart in the cold morning and looked at each other. "The San Juan survey?" he asked. "Completed and certified," she said. "Their southwest corner was off by 60 feet, which is nothing extraordinary. The silver vein they are hoping to exploit is fully within their claim." She paused. "How are the cattle?" "The Herefords are well. I bought 6 more breeding heifers last week. Good bloodlines from a ranch out of Sterling." That was a sound investment. "I thought so." They stood there for another moment, and then he said, "Come inside, it is cold." "Yes," she said, and walked with him toward the house. She stayed. Not permanently, not yet, not in the way that would come later, but she stayed through November and into December, working from the ranch on the growing number of survey inquiries she was receiving from operations across the Southern Territory, her reputation having spread with the efficiency of genuinely good professional work. She drove out on jobs and came back. The ranch became the base from which Collins' cartographic survey operated, and the converted green wagon stood in Alfred Langston's yard between the barn and the bunkhouse like it had always been there. In December, when the first serious snow came and the mountains went white, and the valley was very still and very cold and very beautiful, Alfred asked her to marry him. He did it without particular ceremony because he had the instinct correct that ceremony would make her uncomfortable, that what she wanted was directness and honesty rather than performance. He said it at the kitchen table after supper, with the lamp burning between them and the fire in the stone fireplace going strong. And she looked at him for the kind of long, quiet moment he had come to understand was her way of giving an important thing the weight it deserved before she responded. "You understand what that means with me," she said. Not a question, a statement that required his confirmation. "It means you keep your work," he said. "It means Collins' cartographic survey stays exactly what it is. It means when you need to go to the San Juans or the San Luis Valley or Nevada or wherever the work takes you, you go. It means I am here when you come back and the ranch is here and this is home. It also means," she said carefully, "that I am not going to become someone different. I am not going to stop reading instruments or arguing with land commissioners or getting mud on my surveying coat." "Grace," he said, with the particular patience of a man who means every word, "the reason I am asking you is because of who you are. Not in spite of it, because of it. The woman who stood up in Commissioner Stanhope's office and dismantled Harlan Doss's case with 6 days of field measurements and a 7/10 of a foot closure error. That is the woman I am asking." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Yes." He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat like that by the fire for a while, not saying much because they were both people who understood that some things are complete without additional words. They were married in February of 1880 in Pueblo by a judge who was a friend of Commissioner Stanhope's and who conducted the ceremony with the efficiency of a legal proceeding, which suited them both. Margaret Fitch, The Denver attorney Grace had mentioned in passing attended and brought flowers, which were difficult to acquire in Colorado in February and which made Grace laugh with genuine delight. Rays and Odell and Dutch were there, Dutch having cleaned his coat for the occasion. It was a small affair and a good one. The spring of 1880 brought Langston cattle through the winter with minimal losses. The new Hereford heifers proved to be everything Alfred had hoped, and Collins' cartographic survey completed 4 separate boundary certifications for mining and ranch operations in the Southern Territory, bringing in an income that, combined with Alfred's cattle earnings, made the ranch's financial situation more secure than it had been in years. Grace hired an assistant, a young Ute Mexican man named Felix Sandoval who had grown up in the San Luis Valley and had the kind of intuitive spatial sense that made him a natural at carrying the rod and reading terrain, and who proved to have the mathematical aptitude and dedication to learn instrument work under her instruction. She was a good teacher. Alfred watched her with Felix sometimes, when the assistant was learning the transit work on the ranch's south pasture as a training exercise, and she had the same directness and patience with instruction that she brought to everything else, correcting without condescension, explaining the why behind the method rather than just the method itself. Felix improved rapidly. She also insisted, that spring, on completing what she called the definitive reference map of the Langston Range, which was a comprehensive document showing not just boundaries but the full topography, water sources, grass quality by area, fence conditions, and improvement inventory. She said it was professionally appropriate given that she had done the boundary survey. He suspected she also simply wanted to do it, wanted the complete picture of this land that she had come to be part of, and he loved that about her, that she understood the world through the act of mapping it. When summer came, warm and long in the high grass country, she found she was expecting a child. She told Alfred on a Tuesday evening in July, sitting on the porch in the late light, with the mountains going rose-pink in the west and the cattle sounds coming from the south pasture, told him plainly and directly the way she did everything, and watched his face. His face did the thing it did very rarely, the thing that was complete and unconcealed and had no management to it, a kind of stunned, helpless joy that she had only seen once before, briefly, when Commissioner Stanhope denied Doss's claim. He looked at her and she saw it all go across him, the weight and the wonder of it, and then he took her hand the way he had taken it at the kitchen table in December and held it, and neither of them needed to say much. "Are you well?" he asked. Practically because he was Alfred. "Completely well," she said. "I have consulted with the physician in Saguache. Everything is entirely normal." She paused. "I intend to continue working for as long as I am able to work comfortably. The San Juan job in August is a light traverse, not physically demanding." "Of course," he said, and meant it. "I also want to teach Felix enough before the fall that he can manage the instrument work independently on simpler surveys. He is nearly capable of it." "He is learning fast," Alfred agreed. "He is," she said with evident satisfaction. "He has excellent instincts." The August survey in the San Juans went well. Grace was back in September, larger now but moving with the same purposeful efficiency, and she finished the definitive Langston Range map in October, completing the final ink work at her desk in the green wagon with a precision that she said had nothing to do with her current physical state, and that the suggestion it might was unhelpful. He had not suggested it. She was correcting a position she expected him to take, which he found both unnecessary and endearing. Their son was born in November of 1880. In the house Alfred's father had started and Alfred had finished, with a capable midwife from Saguache named Dolores Argueta, who had been delivering babies in the San Luis Valley for 30 years, and who treated the whole affair with the brisk competence of a professional in command of her domain, which Grace deeply appreciated. Alfred spent a significant portion of the labor pacing the downstairs hall in the way that men have always done in this situation, and Rays, who came to the house during the night to ask if anything was needed, found him there and sat on the stairs and kept him company without making it a sentimental event, which was the best thing Rays could have done, and he knew it. They named the boy Thomas James Langston. Thomas for Alfred's father. James for Grace's father, whose full name had been James Harold Collins, and who had taught his daughter to read instruments before she could read books, and who had told her to follow the unmapped edge. Thomas James Langston arrived in the world with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes, and after Dolers had done everything required and settled Grace comfortably, and Alfred had come in and held his son for the first time with the careful reverence of a very strong man holding something impossibly precious, Grace watched them from the bed and felt something that was entirely outside her capacity to measure or certify, which she found she did not mind at all. The winter of 1880 to 1881 was a quiet one, the best kind of winter on the ranch, cold enough to kill the insects and rest the grass but not brutal, and the cattle were sound, and the house was warm, and Thomas James was healthy and grew with the rapid urgency of a baby who has decided the world is interesting and would like to engage with it as quickly as possible. Grace nursed him and worked at her desk and wrote survey reports and corresponded with Margaret Fitch about several land law matters that interested them both, and read to the baby in the evenings from books she had ordered from Denver, because she had no intention of raising a child who could not appreciate a good book. Alfred watched all of this with the particular pleasure of a man who has been given more than he expected and knows it. He was not an effusive man. He showed his love in the way he showed everything of importance, through sustained and reliable action, through the consistency of being there, through the small attentions that accumulated over time like good work compounds on itself. He made sure the stove was always stocked before Grace had to think about it. He took the night responsibilities with the baby, without being asked on the nights when she was exhausted from a full day of desk work. He built a second room onto the wagon's functional workshop area, a proper study space with a better desk and a window that let in the eastern morning light, for her cartographic work, because he understood that her work was not a side occupation, but as central to who she was as the ranch was to who he was. She found him doing the framing one Saturday morning in March of 1881 and stood in the yard looking at it. "You are expanding the workshop," she said. "I am expanding the workshop," he confirmed, nailing a board. "You did not tell me. I wanted to see if you would like it first." She looked at the framing for a moment, assessing the dimensions. "The east window placement is correct," she said. "Morning light is best for detail work." A pause. "It is a good idea. I occasionally have them," he said, and hit another nail. Spring came again with the wildflowers in the meadow she had labeled Spring Meadow, noted on the first map she had ever drawn of this land. She took Thomas out to see them when he was old enough to sit in the grass and grab at the stems with the single-minded determination of a 6-month-old. And she sat beside him in the sun with her hat over her eyes and thought about her father's voice telling her to follow the unmapped edge, and thought about where that edge had led. The Harlan Doss matter was resolved that spring, quietly. The territorial attorney's office had reviewed the competing claim filing and found sufficient irregularities in the documents Doss had submitted, including correspondence that suggested he had obtained a copy of Brackett's survey, and deliberately built his claim around the measurement errors, knowing that a correct survey would not support his position. He did not go to prison, which was a disappointment to everyone except Everett Cole, who had somehow arranged to be on the correct side of the documentation when it became clear which way the wind was blowing. But Doss's land company was required to pay a substantial fine and was effectively barred from further land filings in the Colorado Territory for 5 years, which curtailed his particular ambitions considerably. Commissioner Stanhope sent a brief formal letter to Alfred informing him of the outcome. Alfred read it, showed it to Grace, and then filed it in the drawer with the certified boundary map. "Done," he said. "Done," she agreed. Felix Sandoval passed his professional certification examination in Denver in the summer of 1881, making him the first licensed surveyor of Ute Mexican heritage in the Colorado Territory, a fact that Grace noted in her correspondence with genuine pride in her students' achievement. Collins' cartographic survey began taking on larger and more complex jobs, including a railroad right-of-way survey for a new spur line in the summer of 1882 that was the most complicated and well-paying project Grace had undertaken. She and Felix worked the survey together over 3 weeks, returning to the ranch with dusty coats and full field notebooks, and the comprehensive exhaustion of people who have done excellent work under hard conditions. Thomas, who was approaching 2 years old by then, and was mobile in the alarming way of all children who have discovered locomotion, ran across the yard to meet his mother when the green wagon came through the gate, having been informed by Dutch that the wagon was visible on the road. Grace stepped down from the wagon and caught him, and swung him up with the ease of a woman who spent her professional life carrying equipment. And Thomas put both hands in her hair and laughed. And Alfred stood at the barn door watching them with the quality of happiness that does not announce itself loudly. That evening after Thomas was asleep, they sat on the porch in the summer dark with the stars out and the mountains invisible but present, a darkness with shape and mass, and Grace put her feet up on the porch rail and said, "I think I would like to write a book." Alfred looked at her. "What kind of book?" "A technical manual on boundary survey methodology for the Western Territories." There is no comprehensive document that accounts for the specific magnetic declination challenges in the Rocky Mountain region. Surveyors are making the same systematic errors Beckett made because there is no authoritative reference that addresses the problem. If the book existed, perhaps fewer families would lose their land to manufactured boundary disputes. He thought about this. That is a significant undertaking. "Yes," she said, "I am aware." "How long would it take?" 2 years, perhaps. "I would work on it alongside the survey business. Felix can handle the simpler jobs independently now. I would focus on the most complex work and the writing." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark mountains. "The Spring Meadow chapter," he said. She looked at him. "The book," he said. "You should include the Langston Range survey as a case study. The Beckett error analysis is thorough and well documented. It would make a good practical example." She was quiet, then laughed, a quiet laugh, the kind she used when something delighted her in a way she had not expected. "Yes," she said, "I think I should." He reached over and took her hand on the armrest of her chair. She turned it over and held his, and they sat like that in the summer dark while the coyotes called from the valley and the horses moved quietly in the paddock and the ranch breathed around them. "Alfred," she said, "Grace, you are a very good man." She said it plainly, the way she said important things without decoration or apology. "I want you to know that I know that." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father's advice," he said, "follow the unmapped edge." "Yes. It brought you here." "Yes," she said. "It did." He brought her hand up and pressed his lips to the back of it, a gesture that was simple and complete, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and they were quiet together in the way of two people who have found their particular home in each other. The book was published in 1884 by a technical press in Philadelphia, under the title Meridian Correction in Rocky Mountain Survey Practice, authored by Grace Collins Langston, licensed surveyor. It was dedicated to her father, James Harold Collins, who told me to follow the unmapped edge, and to A.L., who was at the end of it. It was adopted as a reference text by land offices across the Western Territories within 2 years of publication, and remained in use for decades afterward. They had a second child in 1884, a girl they named Eleanor James Langston, who arrived in the spring when the wildflowers were coming up in the meadow, and who from the earliest observable age had her father's steadiness and her mother's precise brown eyes and an opinion about everything, expressed clearly. The Langston Ranch grew through the 1880s, carefully and soundly, the way Alfred did all things, expanding the herd and improving the facilities and acquiring the adjacent parcel to the west when it came available in 1886. that parcel being, as it happened, on the correct side of the boundary line Grace had established in 1879, making it a clean and unambiguous acquisition. He hired 2 more hands, and a cook of genuine skill named Maria, who made things Dutch would not have been able to explain in any language. Collins' cartographic survey continued to operate from the green wagon and from Grace's study in the ranch house, taking on the significant boundary work across the territory, while Felix Sandoval handled the independent jobs with the growing reputation of a very good surveyor in his own right. Grace took Alina on survey trips when the child was old enough, strapping her in a carrier, and then, as she grew, letting her stand at the instrument and look through the eyepiece, which Alina found compelling in exactly the way her mother had hoped. Thomas showed more interest in cattle than in instruments, which Alfred quietly found both gratifying and amusing, and which Grace said was entirely respectable, and that the world needed both good ranchers and good surveyors. Thomas began following Rays around the property at age 5, with the focused attention of a child who has identified his vocation, and Rays, who had no children of his own, showed him things with the patient thoroughness of a man who found the work of teaching worthwhile. On a clear October afternoon in 1887, Alfred and Grace rode the boundary of the ranch together, the whole perimeter, the way they did once each autumn as a kind of ritual they had never formally named. They rode the northwest corner where Grace had set her transit on that first cold morning in 1879, and the southwest corner where the Beckett error had first revealed itself, and the eastern line along the creek, and the north boundary where the pines began. And they came back to the yard in the early evening with the mountains lit up red and gold, and the smoke rising from the house chimney, and Thomas and Alina visible in the yard doing something that involved Alina giving instructions and Thomas following them with fraternal patience. Alfred stopped his horse and looked at it all. Then he looked at Grace. "Your father's map," he said. She looked at him. "The one you drew," he said. "The first one, the preliminary one on the wagon desk in the storm. It had the meadow labeled. Spring Meadow noted," she said. "Every year when the flowers come up in May, I think about that map." He looked at her steadily. "I think about you drawing it, in the storm, when you had no particular reason yet to care about the meadow." She was quiet for a moment. The horses stood placidly. Below them in the yard, Alina had produced what appeared to be a stick and was explaining something to Thomas using it as a pointing instrument, which was so characteristic that Grace felt laughter rising in her chest. "I had reason to care," Grace said. "The ranch was interesting to me." "You were interesting to me." She looked at the yard, at their children, at the house, at the barn with the good horses looking out over the rails. "I was following the unmapped edge," she said. "I did not know yet what was at the end of it." He reached across from his horse and took her hand, there in the saddle, and she gave it to him, and they sat together on the boundary of the land she had mapped back to him, in the October light, with everything they had built around them and between them, and it was sufficient, and it was more than sufficient, and it was complete. Alina in the yard below had apparently concluded her explanation, and was now attempting to use the stick as a transit rod while Thomas held it, which meant that the next generation of the Langston Range was being surveyed, imprecisely, but with considerable confidence, and Grace Langston watched it and felt the kind of satisfaction that does not fit in any measurement but is as real as any boundary line she had ever run, and as permanent, and as true.